good crowd in here. How is everybody doing? Thanks for tuning in. Um, so, my thought for today is we can keep this sort of like a fireside chat Q&A, kind of casual. Um, Catherine is here and joining. Say hello, Catherine. Catherine's going to be letting folks in as well, so I can stay focused on answering questions and things like that. Um, I was playing with a like an ask me anything question thing right before this started and realized screw it, we'll just use the chat room. So if you do have specific questions that you have or would like to answer, you can go ahead and drop those in the Slack chat room. I'll be reading from there and we'll go roughly in order. I'm going to do my best to answer questions as specifically as I can, and also do my best to not talk out of turn. Answer based on what I know, what I've seen, questions that I've gotten answers to already. If I don't answer your question, I'm going to keep track of all the questions that I don't have an answer to. Talk to some of the experts that I've been working with to try and get those answered as well. So some of the more technical and nuanced versions, I might give a sort of my perspective or recommendation, but not necessarily have the very specific concrete answer. While we're waiting for questions to come in, I can give sort of a quick rundown of the programs, the state of the current programs, for anyone who's been trying to keep up or looked at my giant article that covered everything and said, I just can't get this into my brain right now. I'll try and in like 5 minutes or so break down the individual pieces of the current program, and add in a couple that are specific related to the Philadelphia region as well. So I'm going to operate lastly under the presumption that everyone here is a freelancer, a solo business owner, probably a solo service business owner. Obviously, there's a wide range of kinds of businesses and business situations, including you may have subcontractors, you may sell some products online in addition to your services and things like that. I know a whole lot more about the service side of things than products. Doesn't mean you can't ask those questions, just means I might not have the best answers. So we'll start with that overview while folks are getting their questions ready. And again, you can put those questions right in the chat box, and I will answer those basically in the order that they come in. So don't be shy about asking those. This is I'm here for you. If you prefer to, when I get to you, to come online, come on the screen and explain the situation a little bit more, that's totally okay too. Completely up to you, but you don't have to. So we're going to go through sort of the three core pieces of the CARES Act. The first of which is I think the biggest and most confusing to a lot of folks, which is this PPP, or the Payroll Protection Program. And the idea of this is essentially to avoid employers laying off their workers, because what the government and the economy doesn't want is to then have to go through all the pain of bringing those folks back on. The goal is also to keep people out of the unemployment program, so those resources are available for people who don't have those other options. And so the PPP program is it's a loan-based program. Basically, what the government decided to do is rather than send businesses checks directly, they are working using the SBA, the Small Business Administration, and banks, national, regional, and local banks, to distribute that money. Basically, the way that it works is the PPP loan application process, which opened a couple of weeks ago, has you fill out a bunch of information about the finances of your business to a bank, and then the bank is meant to approve a loan that is equal to 2.5 times your payroll. And if you're a freelancer, that's the first big question mark. We'll come back to that in a second. So 2.5 times your monthly payroll is approved as a loan, and then so long as you use that money once approved to in the way that it's intended, which is to keep your employees on payroll, that loan is then forgiven, which turns it into effectively a grant or a government payment just through this path. It's convoluted, it's confusing. Is it the best way to do it? I don't know. Is it working right now? Probably not. The big thing to know right now is banks have been backed up, unsurprisingly, and that the SBA and banks typically don't have a great relationship, and that banks are also looking at this from a perspective of they're not sure what the rules are, right? Because the rules have been changing day to day from the SBA, especially in the early days of when this was rolled out. This entire program was rolled out in 7 days, which is completely wild. There's a great Planet Money episode about this that I'll track down and share in the after notes, sort of about how this was created and the good and the bad of it. But the banks have this application process. They're concerned about lending you money and then the government changing their mind or the SBA changing their mind and not giving them the money, and then these banks go out of business. So at this point, it's been almost 2 weeks, a week and a half since the original launch of the PPP program, and banks were totally slammed. Some banks I'm hearing, are starting to get back to applicants, but I don't personally know of anybody who, a big business or a small business, who has actually been approved, let alone had money distributed. So far, PPP, no money has actually hit anybody's bank. Now, that's how it's meant to work for traditional businesses. We're talking about self-employed folks and freelancers. Here's where things get interesting. So, self-employed and freelance folks were not supposed to apply to PPP initially, although we were written into the bill. And what was meant to happen was this past Friday, the 10th, a new application was supposed to open up that would collect different information, since we probably aren't paying ourselves with payroll. We may be paying ourselves as a direct pass-through. Some folks are K1, depending on the structure of the business and things like that. If you're a freelancer, it's probably used to 1099 and W9 and all those kinds of things. So if that's you, as of this past Friday, you are able to apply for a PPP, and the intent is that you also get 2.5 months times your revenue. And here's the tricky part. We're freelancers, right? So most folks are not having the exact same amount of income coming in every month, and so there's basically what they're saying is your net income, as is reported from the past 12 months, you're going to take an average of that and then multiply that by 2.5x. Here's where it gets even further tricky. The exact paperwork that banks need for this hasn't been super clear. And I've heard from multiple sources that different banks are handling this at different levels of accuracy, sophistication, or even knowing what to do. The bigger national brands where you probably have an account, a PNC, a Wells Fargo, a Chase, they all have portals set up, but they are not set up in many or most cases for folks like us. And so the best advice that I've heard for people actually making progress with a PPP loan application as a freelancer would be to go to a local community bank, and that could be literally in your neighborhood, in your part of the city. I'm going to blank out off the top of my head what some of the names of them are, but if there was an Inquirer article last week, I think it was First Republic might have been one of them, that if you go and talk to someone at a local community bank, they are better positioned to help people like us. They are not being hit up by the giant businesses. And so if you already have a relationship with a local bank or a credit union, and they're an approved SBA lender, which is the question to ask first, are you an approved SBA lender? That's the starting point for your PPA loan, your PPA. Not those guys. Your PPP loan is going to be a local bank. It is a first come first serve is another tricky part, and so obviously everybody's trying to get their cut of the pie. Everyone's in a hurry. Everyone's rushing, and that's creating a lot of extra stress on individuals as well as bankers. And so my thought process on this right now, being totally candid and honest, is if you have lost income due to all the changes in the economy over the last month, due to lockdown, anything that has put you in a precarious situation, I think it is a good idea to go through the steps to apply for the PPP. And the easiest way to do that is going to be with a local community bank. However, I would not make personal or business plans based on that money because there's no guarantee that there will be money left for you by the time they deploy these loans. Or even if there is money, what rules will change over time. So I think it's a smart thing to do now, but I would caution against putting yourself in a situation to rely on it. So that's part one of this program is the PPP through your local community banks. On the article that I shared, there is a list of documentation that you will probably need. But again, it's likely to vary depending on the bank that you go to. The second piece of the program, a lot of P's, a lot of enunciation here. So the second part of the program is an EIDL loan. And this is a loan program that is designed for disaster situations. Basically, once a region, a state in particular, is designated as a disaster, then the EIDL program kicks into gear, and businesses can apply for businesses under 500 employees, and that does include self-employed people out of the gate, can apply for a loan. And that loan is designed to cover things that the PPP did not cover. I saw Sarah mention the document that was sent around. If somebody wouldn't mind pulling up the link to the article I have, it's indyhall.org/COVID-CARES Act, I believe. CARES Act, all one word. Somebody could put that in the chat and share that around. That would be great. So the EIDL loan is meant to kind of do the things that the payroll protection program isn't. Again, the payroll protection program is forgiven if you use it to keep people on payroll, which technically includes yourself if you're self-employed. EIDL is less restrictive. However, it is an actual loan. It is a low interest loan. The exact interest rate and terms have been kind of a moving target. I've heard anything from 0.5% to 1%, and I've heard 3 years. I've heard 10 years. All these things are kind of moving targets. At the end of the day, I wouldn't use any of those rates as the reason to do something or not do something right now. The question is does this program work for you and how? So with EIDL, it is a blissfully easy application by comparison to the PPP. You should be able to do it in 5 to 10 minutes, and with most of the information it needs is things that you should know off the top of your head. The information you might not know off the top of your head is a tax ID number if you use a business tax ID separate from your social security number, as well as your revenue for 2019, or the previous year rather, as well as cost of goods sold. One of the most common questions that I've been getting from freelancers in particular about that cost of goods sold question is, well, I'm a freelancer. I don't even know what that is. Cost of goods sold is a measure that would be on your financial statements and is more representative of the costs that go into creating a physical good that you would ship or create. Some accountants might argue that some of the tools that we use could factor into cost of goods, but they make more sense as other budget line items. So it's a pretty safe bet that unless your tax preparer says otherwise, your cost of goods sold is zero. So that's the application. It's pretty easy, and in my opinion, is still worth doing. Now, there's a caveat to that. The way this loan worked initially, when it first came out, was you can apply for a loan, essentially any amount that you need to cover your expenses. However, there was a checkbox at the end for a $10,000 instant advance, which is neither instant nor necessarily an advance. Basically, that $10,000 was meant to be a grant. The rest of the loan, as I mentioned, is an actual loan, unlike the PPP program or the PPP application part of things. But that advance is forgivable. So in theory, what that meant was you could fill out this relatively easy application and get up to $10,000 as a grant to help cover your non-payroll costs. And these tools do stack. So anything you get from EIDL is just subtracted from the amount that you're approved for the PPP. In the last few days, some things changed with SBA, and they made the decision to reduce the amount that is given through the EIDL loan. from $10,000 to $1,000 per employee up to $10,000. And so if you're self-employed, what that basically means is if you fill this out, there is a $1,000 grant out there that can be used to help cover your rent, cover other bills, really anything that you need to use it for if you've lost contracts and things like that, or had your hours cut in the last month or so due to COVID. I just got a note from somebody saying that Centric Bank is another bank that is accepting small business local applications only. So you might want to check them out, Centric Bank. And if we get more information from them, we'll pass that along in the notes afterwards. So, all right, so we've got the PPP, we've got the EIDL, which is much easier, but really at the most is going to max out at $1,000. I just got a note from one of the Indie Hall members who applied for this on March 23rd. So that's what, three weeks ago, that he has a pending distribution of the EIDL $1,000 into his bank account. It's not available yet, but that shows you also timeline is a factor here. So he applied 3 weeks ago, probably ahead of lots of other folks, and he's just seeing the pending payment now. So take that into a factor, is even if you get your application in now, these optimistic timelines on actually seeing this money could easily be 3 to 4 weeks or more after you apply. The final piece that's super specific to Philadelphia and the Pennsylvania region is the changes to the unemployment rules. And if you're self-employed, you probably know that unemployment is typically not an option for you. And one of the changes in the bill opened up unemployment benefits to folks who are self-employed. Which basically means that you can file an unemployment claim and be eligible for up to, it's between 40 and 50% of your typical monthly income. All the same sort of guidelines theoretically apply, as I mentioned earlier, where if your income is variable, they'll probably take a rolling estimate on the previous 12 months before the disaster. However, the thing to know is this, is that while the bill is national, the implementation of unemployment is state by state, which means it's up to the state to implement the rules and make it possible for us to apply. Currently, the state of Pennsylvania does have their standard unemployment portal open with all of the other rules, but the self-employment portal, the self-employment application, does not exist yet. The last update I got was between, I think, Friday night or Saturday morning over the weekend, is they're estimating about 2 weeks until the self-employed unemployment portal is open, and then you can figure that it's easily going to be another 2 or 3 weeks before any payouts come from there. Also keep in mind that the information, or the application for unemployment is typically in 2 week cycles, and they're expanding the number of 2 week cycles you can apply retroactively for. So however long it takes them, they're going to let you apply for the unemployment benefit as a self-employed person all the way back until, I think it's January 27th is the date. But it is another 2 weeks at least before that portal even exists. There's been some questions about, well, should I apply through the standard one? Some states, including, I believe, New Jersey, has said if you apply through the standard one, that will, hold your place in line. But I haven't heard that firsthand. I've only heard that through secondhand, and so I have a hard time believing it. Of a first-hand account of that from the New Jersey Department of Labor. I'd be very interested to read it. But currently in Pennsylvania, that is not the case, and they've specifically said if you are self-employed, do not apply through the standard portal. You will be rejected, and you'll have to reapply. Some folks have said, well, what's the harm in applying? My theory is they're being slammed in terms of volume like they've never seen before. So you applying knowing that you're going to be rejected is just slowing down everybody, including future you, when you need to reapply. So that's sort of the mental math that I consider. The last bit that I want to mention, besides PPP, EIDL, and the unemployment components, is any support locally and regionally. Ben just posted in the chat room, there's funding options for businesses in Philadelphia, including nonprofits through organizations like PIDC. There is also a relatively small government, Philadelphia government fund, that the first wave of applications opened up about 2 weeks ago. I believe that the pool of a few $1 million was drained pretty quickly. To my knowledge, as of this morning, none of those applications have been approved, or if they have been, no payouts have been made. But there is, I believe, dates coming out for a second wave and possibly a second pool of money. The thing to remember with all of these is they're relatively small pools of money, and when there's bigger businesses with legal departments and accounting teams that can sit there and click refresh and get all the documents prepared, the frustrating and very, very unfortunate reality is we're ending up kind of last in line here. So the closest thing to good news that I have is that I've had some really great communication over the last couple of weeks with the Commerce Department in particular, both in terms of helping me stay aware of changes in programs that they're hearing and seeing on the inside. And I'm going to try and keep the ones that may be relevant to us available and updated through the Philly Freelance email list. But the truth is everyone that I talk to is kind of just as frustrated as we are. A lot of folks would like to get on the line and give a concrete answer, but a lot of the answers are we don't know yet. So Anna just posted there's the city deadline for the micro enterprise $5,000 grant. That $5,000 grant is I believe the only one that, and I believe it's an up to $5,000 as well, that self-employed solo businesses may qualify for. So definitely check that out. But I'm also fairly certain that while the deadline is tomorrow, that program is also oversubscribed. One of the things that was frustrating to me about that program when it was released is they said we will distribute these grants for self-employed folks, but we will give priority to certain categories. And one of the categories that they said they would give priority to are freelancers who do a lot of subcontracting with other freelancers, right? So basically freelancers that look like other businesses and provide jobs to other businesses are going to get priority. So once again, as individual businesses, the institutional support for us is fairly limited. So that's sort of the overview of the pieces of the program in way more than 5 minutes. But I do have some questions, and I did promise this would be a Q&A, so I want to use the rest of the time for Q&A. If you have questions about any particular part of the program, how it applies to you, situations that you've run into, confusing, conflicting messages, you can go ahead and put those in the chat below, and I'm going to use the rest of the hour to answer those as best as I can. Again, if I don't have an answer that I feel comfortable giving in terms of things that I've either been asked before or have gotten references from an expert, I'm going to do my best to not talk out of turn and instead share perspective. But I am going to be keeping track of all these questions and trying to get as concrete of an answer as I can for all of the others. So the first question from Catherine, is it the same for an independent contractor getting paid, aka not laying off yourself? So I believe this is referring to the PPP in terms of the goal. The goal is to, as I mentioned with PPP, is to keep people from being laid off. I think that the goal here for freelancers is just to give them any level of support. I think that my interaction with government at state, local, and federal level is that we are a blind spot of understanding. Even at a local level, when I sit in meetings with folks who do economic planning and development, it is very rare for them to have first or even secondhand understanding of how freelancers earn an income. The idea of multiple clients and variability is totally foreign. Most things in entrepreneurship are, and so it's really, really tricky to look at any of these bills and say, I do expect them to understand it, but the truth is there's a deep lack of understanding at the government level, even in places where you would expect there to be understanding. And so I think it's part of the reason why these programs feel like they're sort of haphazardly put together for us. Most of the times when government folks hear gig economy and gig workers, they're thinking Uber drivers and Lyft drivers and grocery delivery drivers and things like that. They don't think about solo service business owners like us. So the forms don't make sense because they don't understand how our business works and things like that. So trying to draw these comparisons can absolutely be tricky. It's not not just you, if that's how you're feeling. Nicola had a question. I'm going to read from the chat room. It says, I'm confused about what I'm hearing from different sources. My CPA talks about 75% of the PPP loan, I'm going to fill in some gaps here, being forgivable because only 75% of the Schedule C income is payroll. My question is, how do I ensure that 100% of the loan is forgivable? I don't want to take 2.5 times of my income if 25% isn't forgiven. Would I only ask for 1.875 times of my Schedule C income line? So confused. Yeah, this is the kind of mess that we get ourselves in when the math is unclear. An accountant might give different advice. But I think that the easiest answer right now is to make decisions based on how the loans will be forgiven is entering yourself into a game of madness. If you are concerned about the percentage of the loans that are forgivable, that is a completely understandable and reasonable concern. However, this falls in that category of no one's really sure. The rules are written really confusingly and ambiguously, and what I think is the most useful thing to do is think about your own risk tolerance for, when they do come after that 25%. I think it would be easier to collect the loan and then stash that 25% and say, worst case scenario, I'm going to pay that back. Or worst case scenario, I really needed it, and then I have to figure out a way to pay it back later. But the key here is that the program is as ambiguous as it is, including the payback components. And so I would be making the decision on, do I have the need to apply, right? How urgent is that? Do I have the time and energy to apply? Do I have the paperwork in place to apply? If the answer to those three things is yes, then I would start the application now, because there's also an amount of time between when you start the application, when the bank responds to your application, when you're approved for a loan, and when you receive it, which means there's a bunch of time and stages where you can say, you know what, cancel the loan, right? You could go through the entire process right up until the point where they say, okay, we've approved the loan, and you say, you know what, I don't want it, because somewhere along the way, one of these rules became clearer. That is a wacky game to be playing with the government of all people. But I think it's the way we need to be thinking when none of these rules are clear for anybody, and they're especially ambiguous for us. I would start the process now and use the time between now and whenever whenever the finances become approved, to then look at the rules and say, are they any clearer? Is there right now, no one has actually received money and no one has had to pay it back, and so anything you read is likely to be speculation. I think that's the way I'm thinking about it, and how I'm making decisions. Hopefully that is helpful and answers the question. Got a thumbs up from Nicola. Thank you. What if you haven't been in business for a full year? This is a common question I've been getting. The question here is how much of the year? So I have know some folks who left their jobs in January and February. Ouch. And have essentially almost no finances to show. If you've got any finances to show for 2019, that's what you have to use. There are basically two options for you. If you've been in business for too little time to have enough income to report, then you basically have two options there. One is to do nothing, which is a really terrible option. And then two, depending on how recently you left the previous employer, would be to file for unemployment. Here's where things get tricky. Is the unemployment process, as I mentioned, isn't open for us at all. And depending on the relationship with the employer, if you apply for unemployment, you put down that you were let go, and the employer is then notified and they say they weren't let go, they left to go start their own business or whatever it is, then your claim is likely to be rejected. It's essentially guaranteed to be rejected. So there is this very frustrating gap in time, where if you started a business in the last 3 to 4 months, there's not a really good answer for you yet. I've heard from enough folks that I'm actively seeking something, but none of the existing programs seem to address that. If you have limited income from 2019, as in you don't have a full 12 months, the amount that you're eligible for is likely to be something, but much less, because essentially the way it's all being calculated is they're taking a 12-month cycle and dividing it by 12. So if you've only got 6 months of income, you're looking at seeing roughly a 50%. 6 months of reported income, you're only going to see half of a year's worth of the loan being applied. Continuing to scroll through the questions here. Some great resources being shared. Aisha says, I'm a sole proprietor, DPA, retail selling jewelry at craft shows, in business since 2014, don't have any employees. Which relief funds could I qualify for? So I would apply for the PPP loan for sure, and reinforcing my recommendations before, your best bet is to work with a local community bank on that. The EIDL loan is an option, keeping in mind that your cost of goods sold line item is going to look different from a freelancer. So you've been in business since 2014. You know what COGS is. Make sure you've got that accurate. That will obviously impact the loan itself. Since you're self-employed, the forgivable advance portion is still going to cap at $1,000 for you. But the rest of the loan, which is again low interest, long term, could be available. To help you, cover losses during this time. And then lastly, the unemployment for self-employed folks should be available for you too when that comes online. The unemployment piece for freelancers is kind of ambiguous in terms of how much proof you need to show, or what proof you need to show that you are no longer employed since you are self-employed. Is it going to be a visible drop in revenue? There's been certain things written into the bill. I believe both the PPP and EIDL are specifically, like, their qualifier is, do you feel a sense of economic uncertainty, which I think we all do, even if we haven't lost money. I'm not 100% sure that translates over to the unemployment component. And again, that's one of the most ambiguous ones, because our state hasn't implemented it. And even once they have the portal up and running, it is up to them to sort of choose how they implement the rules. So we're going to keep our eyes closely on that one. And if I have any details before the portal is open, I'll be sharing those out on the affiliatefreelance.com email list as well. I have a question from someone asking, is this entirely past income based? Is there a way to show multiple years? I took a sabbatical and was full-time job searching. If you don't know, like to hear from other experts. So it is past income based. Certain parts of this program are I believe you can use 2018 reporting if you do not have 2019 taxes filed yet. But that's a question that I'm going to need to turn to the experts for, exactly how that works. Most of what I've been looking at has been 2019 based. But I'm pretty sure at least certain parts of this you may be able to show 2018 because your 2019 paperwork is not ready yet. I'm not 100% certain how that applies to self-employed folks, so that's a very good question. I'll try and get some more about that. I've got a question, says, as a 1099 contractor, I personally bank with Wells Fargo, and while my small business employer banks with a small credit union locally, would it be best practice for me to apply for the paycheck program with the credit union even though I don't bank with them? My answer for this is going to be yes, based on everything that I've heard, and this is locally, across the state, across the country, is that the big banks are being the hardest to deal with. They are the most risk averse. In a lot of interesting ways, your local community bank is actually better suited. Yes, there are advantages to going to a bank that has where you have a previous business relationship. but that is not a guarantee of anything. And if getting to the front of the line only to be told we can't work with you, that's not going to help you at all. So I'm hearing from lots of sources that going to a local community bank, even if you don't have a business relationship with them, your odds of getting support are much better. It is also allowed to apply through multiple banks. What you can only be approved through one. So once you're approved by one, your others will be rejected. But it is okay, I would say acceptable, and maybe even a good idea if you're trying to hedge bets to begin the application process with multiple banks, knowing full well that you're likely to get better support through a local community bank. A quick update from my back channel about the question about taking loans and then having to pay back part of it because it's not forgivable. It is currently a 1% payback rate, and you can pay that back as quickly or as slowly as you need to. So again, with the unforgiven loan portions of this program, these interest rates are pretty low, much lower than any sort of credit card, and even lower than most bank rates. So kind of worth checking out. Anna mentions, and this is great, I actually just found out about this yesterday, Temple SBDC has daily morning Zoom office hours where they're doing two things. One, this is at 9 a.m. every day, if you want to start your day with a bang. Listen to some folks talk about what new rules have been implemented over the course of the last 24 hours, knowing full well that as self-employed folks, most of these things won't apply to us, but if you're a super interested and curious person, want to stay on top of it, that is there. And then they open up for questions as well. It is free. I don't have the link handy if somebody wouldn't mind posting that in the chat. But either way, I'll include that in the links that we share in the wrap up of this as well. So I'm just going to share some notes from the chat since people are being super helpful in here, which I love and appreciate. A note from Ben: the EIDL loans are low interest. The number is 3.75% over 30 years for the EIDL, 1% loan for the PPP loan if you have to repay any portion of it. So in almost any kind of circumstances, it's good relative to living off of credit cards or other high interest lending services. So putting those numbers side by side is helpful. I'm also trying to think about this in long terms, right? So as a freelancer, one of the tricky things is often even if we're not living sort of hand to mouth, we make enough money to pay our bills. There is a two-part decision-making process here. One is our immediate financial needs, and then the other is the long-term impacts of how we fix it. And so we're being given a number of options, and in some cases, and I would like to talk more about this as a community, we will have to create more options as well. The short-term options are going to dry up pretty quickly. How we cover our costs short-term, long-term, what we can do to support ourselves and each other, what we can do to adjust our businesses to get back on track and start earning revenue again. I want to be thinking about the long-term as well, and when you start factoring the long-term, you can also start thinking about loan payback loan payback when there's no money coming in is the most terrifying thing ever. Taking on money when there's no money coming in feels like a really bad move. All these loans have a 6-month period before they need to be paid back anyway. And I believe that's 6 months from when they're paid out. So there's a period of time that you take this loan and you don't have to worry about making that payment. But we need to keep that short term and long term in perspective at the same time. A couple of folks have asked if the video call will be available to watch later. Yes, I'm going to share this recording for sure, since a lot of folks were also not able to tune in. And one other tip that I got in my back channel is if you're applying through multiple banks, don't tell each bank that you applied through another one. I guess that is kind of obvious, but I think as honest people, we tend to want to be honest. If they ask, I'm not sure if that lying is the best move, but if my back channel wants to answer to that, how they would handle that, I'd love to read that. The last question that I've got here says, I read that if you are approved for both EIDL and PPP loans, the money can't be used for the same things. For instance, if you use the EIDL money for certain expenses, you can't use that money for the same items under the money from PPP for same items. The key to remember with PPP is that for our use case, assume that PPP needs to be used for paying you, right? Where that gets tricky is freelancers like, well, I pay me and then I pay my bills, and paying me to pay my rent versus paying me to pay for my Adobe Creative Suite, things like that. One of the easy ways to think about this right now, because again, it is not super clear what that means when you don't have payroll for yourself, is to keep a clear paper trail. So having the money come in and keep a record of this is how this money is being spent, and showing that the money is going to paying you as an individual rather than paying for business expenses for the PPP loan is going to be the safest move. The EIDL loan is not restrictive. Now, the thing to know about them is the EIDL amount will be deducted from the PPP loan if you're approved. Um, so, uh, again, those two things stack. So if you find yourself in a situation where you have both, you're going to want to keep it clear which money came from which and how that money was then used. And I think using even the most basic record keeping is going to be better than nothing. The other thing to remember here, and I hesitate to go on the record even saying this, is, but I think it's also true, is the rules are changing quickly and ambiguous, and they're being deployed to millions of people. So the ability for the nuances of these rules to be enforced is completely unclear. And so again, that comes back to your risk tolerances. How comfortable are you with doing something that is unclear, but also knowing that it is it's going to be extraordinarily difficult for the government to enforce? That's not a concrete answer, unfortunately, but again, it's part of the how I'm thinking about this and how I'm encouraging other folks to think about this as well. I have gotten to the bottom of the questions in the chat. We do have about 15 minutes left. If anyone has any questions they want to drop in there, or if you would like to jump on the video and ask a question directly to me, that's okay too. If you want to do that, you can raise your hand using the Zoom raise hand feature. I believe you have to click on the participants button at the bottom first, and then you can raise your hand by clicking the button, and then I can invite you on screen. If no one does have any other questions, what I can share in the meantime is, like I said, I'm keeping track of as much as I can. I've got some great support and advisors who are really more knowledgeable than me about the ins and outs, but they also are keeping their finger to the pulse to some of the industry back channels, the tax companies, the tax advisors, and things like that. And so I'm getting forwarded all kinds of stuff, and I'm trying to filter out the things that are specifically relevant to us, or things that are making the ambiguous things a bit clearer. The almost every day I am adding some kind of update to that article that was linked earlier, the indiehall.org/COVID-CARES Act, CARES Act, all one word. So you can keep checking that there. And then the other thing I said is, I've mentioned the phillyfreelance.com newsletter. We are hosting events weekly, increasingly more. I mentioned before that we've got folks who I've been talking to about how we can start organizing and sharing lessons about how we actually support ourselves and our businesses and our community when the institutional support isn't here for us. So that'll be coming in the form of workshops, classes, office hours, not specifically around the things like PPP and EIDL, but about how do you go and find new clients right now, right? It seems like a crazy time to go finding new clients, but the truth is businesses are still spending money. The businesses that aren't making money aren't spending any money, but there are businesses that still are making money, and they need services, including services like what you do, perhaps. And so the question becomes, how do you figure out who those are, figure out how to reach them, and figure out how to offer them something that they actually need and would benefit from. And then also, how can we as a community support one another, whether it's exchanging opportunities and leads, whether it's learning new skills, whether it's collaborating and going after projects that an individual wouldn't necessarily go after, but maybe a team of 2 or 3 people with complementary skills can go after. This is the kind of creative thinking that I think we need to be deploying, because the reality is, and I think this is not a criticism anywhere in particular except our government, is I think we're coming to the realization that no one. I can say this for myself only. I am comfortably at the realization that no one is coming to save us. These programs are available in the capacity that they're available, and as I said, we should use them to the best of their ability. They are meant to be used. Actually, that brings up a question that I've heard from a number of folks: is should I apply? I feel like I'm taking money from somebody else. The program is designed for you to have money so that you can put money back into the economy. You having this money is designed so that you have money on hand to be able to go buy groceries, not just go buy grocery stores, but also buy from the local restaurants that are doing delivery, and continue putting money through the economy. When the money flowing halts, that's what's bad, and that's why the government wants money to be. They want us to spend this money. They want it because you spending the money keeps other people employed. So is the money you're receiving from any of these applications taking the money out of somebody else who might need it more? In an abstract concept of maybe, I mean, technically possibly, but the government is continuing to work to grow these pools in so much as they can. But the reason they exist in the first place is so that you have that money and will go spend it somewhere else in the economy. So I think we should be using these programs. However, we can't rely on them. And if I have a takeaway for those of you who are still in the room, I think that's it: is do these steps. They're frustrating, they're annoying. I hate paperwork too, maybe more than anybody else. Makes me want to throw up. But do the thing and then say, I put in the application and I will respond when the bank emails or calls. And then shift gears into thinking about how can I serve other businesses with the skills and services that I have. Who does have money that is still being spent? And how do I connect myself to those opportunities? And so that's my big area of focus with Philly Freelance and Indie Hall right now, is how do we make sure that everyone has visibility and access to the resources and support they need. I do have one more quick question in the chat from Nicola. Looking at the PPP application, no silly or basic questions. This is a judgment-free zone, always. How would a single-member LLC classify themselves in the first box? When the CPA does taxes, they file under my social security number, and as a single-member LLC, sole proprietor. So I'm going to download exactly what you're looking at so I know for sure. If you are a single member LLC sole proprietor, I would go with the simple one and check sole proprietor. That said, you are. I'm getting my back channel notes here. You are a Schedule C filer, but this particular question doesn't ask that. So I'm going to say you would go with a sole proprietor. However, know that once your application is in, if something is filled out incorrectly, you will hear back from the bank. I've now heard from multiple people that filled out the PPP loan that if something was out of whack, they got a message back from the bank over email, and rather than going through the entire application process, they were able to reply to the email with an updated version of the document. Sole proprietor, yes, that would be my answer. So my unexpert opinion here is that checking sole proprietor is the best option of these, based on the information that you gave. But I don't know for sure, so I will double check that. But also know that if you get that wrong, you don't go back to the very, very beginning, right? So I think that's the key is if you have a particular question on this form, fill it out to the best of your ability. It is a good idea to get your accountant, who's probably helping you prepare some of these documents, to take a look at it. there is a matter of opinion, there is a matter of fact. This application is being processed by the bank. So the question is what does the bank want? It's tough for your tax preparer to know that for sure. So fill it out to the best of your ability. Do not be surprised or upset if the first version of your form comes back with errors. You get to update that error and send it back, and the bank can continue the process. Getting the application is the first step, and then once you're in that approval process, there may be adjustments that need to be made. Cool. Awesome. Well, I see folks do have to drop off at the end of the hour. They've got other Zoom places to be. I want to thank all of you for coming by. I hope this was useful. I hope you had your questions answered, even if you weren't the one asking it. If you do have new questions that come up, going forward while you're going through this, or also if you have a positive experience, a positive update, you do get some distribution or you learn something new. I would love to get those updates too, so I can include the positive movement that people are hearing and feeling in my updates as well. And you can email me directly, alex@indyhall.org. That's INDYHALL.org. And I would love to hear and, cheers you for making it through the gauntlet, but also include that as hopefully some motivation for folks who are still waiting. Cool. I'm going to say goodbye and thank you. Big thank you to Catherine for also helping run Zoom behind the scenes for me. If you are someone who is interested in running events on Zoom, Catherine is definitely an awesome person to be talking to. She's been learning a lot as a supporting role for folks that are running Zoom events. So check her out. And if you need her contact info, you can hit me up as well. So thanks everybody. Have a great rest of your it's Tuesday. Have a great rest of your Tuesday. I need to stop referring to days, and we'll share this video and all the resources that I mentioned in an email afterwards. Have a good one. Bye bye.
Valid.